Hey everybody, what's up? It's Ehren here at QBC Canada, Question Period Canada. Happy weekend, it's Friday, that's great. We've got an exciting week behind us. Hopefully this is going to be an
breather and chat a bit about something that's become like my right hand. It's always there and I use it every single day, rain or shine. It's Notion, an absolute godsend of a platform.
Sorry,
it helps me manage the wild jungle that my work often turns into.
there.
What you might not know is that they launched a brand.
All right. I'm messed up here. This is an interesting one. This is live broadcast, so I'm going to try to work my way through it. All right. Got it figured out. All right, guys, from the top. Ehren here, Question Period Canada. It's Friday. Happy weekend, everyone. I hope you've had a good week. It's been exciting in the house. It's been a wild week. It's probably going to be a little more quiet, a little tamer today. Anyhow, drop some other videos this week, which I'd like you to check out. It's worth a look. One on the WEC, another one on the Speaker of the House. Some interesting stuff. This morning I reviewed the live speech that Poilievre did from Newfoundland, St. John's this morning. It was good. It was great. Anyhow, we're going to jump into it. Question period. We've got it ready to go. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. We're going to jump straight into question period here and get that going. All right.
Questions
We're kicking it off. Questions orale. Here we go.
With plummeting polls in Atlantic Canada, this Prime Minister is panicked, desperate, and making it up as he goes along. Only a year ago, Liberal MPs voted against a Conservative motion to axe a carbon tax from home heating. What a difference a year makes. I know my farmers in Alberta are sure wondering what it takes for them to get some relief from this Prime Minister's carbon tax. But yesterday, the Prime Minister admitted that his carbon tax is unaffordable. So how much worse do the polls have to get for the Prime Minister to axe his carbon tax for all Canadians?
Hear, hear.
Sorry about the rough start there, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we came into power in 2015, projected emissions growth in Canada, so pollution levels was going to increase to 80 million tons by 2030. We brought this down 80 million tons, more than 80 million tons, in fact, and since then, we've reduced it by another 50 million tons, Mr. Speaker. So that's more than 100 million tons of pollutions that Canada won't have to endure because of us, despite the Conservative Party of Canada. We're only getting started, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan to fight climate change and to help Canadians with affordability. We'll keep going at it.
L'honorable député de Foothills.
While the Prime Minister presses pause on his carbon tax in Atlantic Canada, the Liberals are blocking a Conservative bill that will exempt the carbon tax from on-farm fuels, making food more affordable. I guess the desperate pleas of Canadian farmers don't have the same weight as the Prime Minister's plummeting polls in Atlantic Canada. But let's be clear. Putting a pause is only a move of desperation for this Prime Minister, who will double down, as this Minister just said, on his pledge to quadruple the carbon tax. Again, the Prime Minister's admitted his carbon tax is unaffordable. When will he axe his carbon tax for all Canadians?
Axe the tax. It's got to go.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, as my father used to say, when you point the fingers, there's always three fingers pointing back at you. When it came time to decrease funding to farmers, the leader of the official opposition sat on his hand at the cabinet table. When it came time to increase funding to farmers, all Conservatives MPs sat on their hands. And on C-234, if it was so important for the leader of the official opposition, he should have sat on his hand and worked a little harder.
L'honorable député de Foothills.
The Liberals don't care about food costs or affordability. Canadians are struggling to put food on the table after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government. Almost 2 million Canadians accessed a food bank in March. That's up 79% from March of 2019. A third of those people using food banks are children, and almost 20% of Canadian families are food insecure. A Prime Minister who is in desperation mode is not worth the cost. Again, the Prime Minister has admitted his carbon tax is unaffordable. When will he axe that tax for all Canadians so they can afford to put food on the table?
He does look a bit like Clark Kent, just without the glasses.
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker, we know that right now many Canadian
Peace, love, and
families
harmony.
are struggling with increased costs. Last night, I was speaking with Faye, and Faye shared with me that he came to Canada with his family 5 years ago from Syria. And he shared the impact that the Canada Child Benefit had on his family, enabled them to ensure that they could buy food and the things that their children needed. This is one story, Mr. Speaker, of the 3.5 million Canadian families that receive this benefit each and every month.
L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker.
All right, Luke, let's go.
800,000 Quebecers are resorting to food banks every month. That's one Quebecer in 10. 30% more in 1 year. 73% more than in 2019. And what's worse,
She does.
70% of food banks are running short of food. And the Liberals want to hike the carbon tax, which will increase the cost of everything. When will the Prime Minister scrap the second carbon tax of 20 cents a litre that he's imposed on all Quebecers?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Tough at the
Mr.
pumps.
Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his
Randy's not
question.
very smart.
And it's clear, Mr. Speaker,
not.
we are in the heat of the action. We're stabilizing grocery prices for Canadians. There's the Canada Child Benefit, which continues to put money in the pockets of Canadians and Quebecers. Mr. Speaker, the carbon tax doesn't apply
Always puts
in
his
Quebec,
hand in
and
his
the member
pocket.
knows that full well. Mr. Speaker, we are here to support Quebecers and Canadians, and we will continue getting the job done.
I don't know.
L'honorable député...
The job's not
Honourable
getting
member
done,
for
right?
Mégantic-L'Érable. Well, they're missing in action because yesterday in a newspaper article it said that over 800,000 Quebecers are resorting to food banks. It's a national embarrassment. That's the legacy of 8 years of Liberal government. And further on it says the face of poverty is changing. Workers, women, students, university students, are all resorting to food banks. The Liberals are plummeting in the polls. Will the Prime Minister scrap the second carbon tax that he's imposed on all Quebecers? Yes or no?
How many carbon taxes can there be?
Mr. Speaker, once
Peace,
again,
love, and harmony.
on this side of the House, we recognize that many Canadian families are facing challenges. Just last week, I had the opportunity to visit the Eden Food for Change in the riding of Mississauga Ehren Mills. And that institution, that organization helps to feed individuals each and every day. Through the Community Services Recovery Fund, we've put $400 million into these community organizations to help address these problems.
Her voice is really funny. She sounds like she's trying to convince you of something.
Mr. Speaker, Radio-Canada revealed that the Liberals are considering revising downward immigration thresholds for 2026 because of the housing crisis. The minister even confirmed he planned to say more on November 1st, but Ottawa is still reviewing its thresholds without talking to Quebec and the provinces. Quebec and the provinces are responsible for healthcare, education, enculturation, infrastructure, and the list goes on. They're the only ones who know their capacity for successful immigration. So will the government commit to consulting them and adjusting thresholds according to provincial settlement capacity? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite knows full well, Quebec sets its own immigration levels. They can choose francophone applicants, and they will build the housing they need and provide the jobs for those people. Mr. Speaker, we always respect Quebec's jurisdiction around immigration, and newcomers are undeniably part of the solution. The Honourable Member for Saint Jean.
I need to get a poppy, guys. She's not wearing a poppy.
Was talking about revising thresholds. The Liberals accused us of being anti-immigration. But when the Liberals revise the thresholds as they're doing now, that doesn't mean they're anti-immigration. When it's them, it's fine. When it's someone else, it's bad. Mr. Speaker, on the initiative of the Bloc, on Tuesday, we'll be discussing those immigration thresholds. Will we be able to have an intelligent debate without the Liberals suggesting that everyone but them is intolerant?
All right, guys, give a like if you haven't already. Thank you very
The
much.
Honorable
That's
Parliamentary
great.
Secretary.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bloc wants us to stand up for immigrants in Quebec, and we're happy to be a part of the solution. Quebec has the exclusive power, though, to select the vast majority of immigrants coming to Quebec. And under the Canada-Quebec Accord, Quebec also receives financial compensation from the federal government. So we respect Quebec jurisdiction around immigration, and we work very well. We are working very well with the government of Quebec. That government is a good partner for us.
De New Westminster, Burnaby.
We're seeing a housing crisis across the country, and Halifax is seeing one of the worst in Canada. People are forced to live in parks and in their cars. Women fleeing violence have nowhere to go when their stay at a shelter ends. Students can't find a home they can afford. Now, Liberals and Conservatives finger point, but between them, these two parties have lost over 1 million affordable homes over the last 17 years. When will the Liberals finally build the homes people desperately need so no one has to sleep on the streets in Halifax?
It's true. I live in Halifax, and there are people sleeping in the streets.
Mr. Speaker,
10 cities
70,000
all
new
over the
units
place?
for individuals who have experienced homelessness. 122,000 people who are close to being homeless are not homeless because of the National Housing Strategy. That applies to what I just said before on homelessness. That member rightly brings up the plight and position of women who experience homelessness. Over 400 units of shelter, either renovated or constructed through this government's investments. We have more to do. It's not an acceptable situation, but we will get it done.
It's not an acceptable situation, but we will get it done.
Making things worse, but they're certainly not making things better.
Peter Julian's on
Here's
fire.
the reality of yet another Canadian. Mr.
All
Speaker,
lit up on
Stephanie
Friday.
Finlayson of Woodstock, Ontario, has been struggling to make ends meet. Big corporations who make record profits are gouging people like Stephanie at the grocery store, at the pumps, with bank fees, and with their cell phone bills. After working full-time and paying her monthly bills, she only has $9 left for food. Under this Liberal government, people are going under, and Conservatives have no interest in cracking down on corporate greed. When is this government going to put something in place to protect Stephanie from this ongoing corporate gouging?
Got fired up there. He doesn't speak very often. Fridays, Freaky Friday.
Question. Well, our government
Well, here we
is
go.
stepping up to
Ryan
fight
Turnbull's a
inflation
clown.
and alleviate the pressures in our economy to address the affordability challenges that Canadians are under. We see the Conservatives shudder at even the thought of standing up to corporations. We brought them to the table. They've produced action plans. We're updating our competition laws, and I wish all members of this House would get on side and vote in support of our Affordability Act.
Well, there's no drama today? Come on.
South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Turnbull, Rick Perkins.
From St. John's East, in a show of great compassion to Atlantic Canadians, said he was sick and tired about hearing from people.
He's got to get off
the
the script, though.
Then he said he and his fellow Liberals voted against removing the carbon tax from home heating. And after 8 years, NDP Liberals now admit the carbon tax is hurting people and it's not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister admit the pain he has caused and axe the entire carbon tax?
Rid of the whole thing. It's a good idea.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that climate change is real,
necklace.
and Nova Scotians know that climate change is real. Over the past 2 years, we've had fires, we've had floods, we have hurricanes, but we've also heard that Nova Scotians need help and they need time. And that's why I'm proud that our government has incentivized heat pumps and created incentives for medium and low-income families to ensure that they can make the transition to clean and affordable energy. Our government is committed to addressing climate change, and we will be there to help all Canadians make that change.
We had forest fires and flooding within 1 month in Nova Scotia. Climate change is a serious issue.
This from a panicking, plummeting Prime Minister. And after 8 years, even that panicking Prime Minister now admits his carbon tax is not working. Yet the NDP Liberal government continues to punish Canadians with a carbon tax on everything. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. 1,000 people last night in Nova Scotia demanded the Liberals axe the tax. When will the Prime Minister do his job and axe the entire carbon tax?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, we want to save people money and fight climate change at the same time. We know that a price on pollution reduces emissions and puts more money in the pockets of middle-class families. We also know that many families who use home heating oil in Atlantic Canada are having trouble making the switch, a switch that they want to make, Mr. Speaker, to a cleaner and cheaper source of heat, particularly in rural communities. That's why we're pausing the price on pollution on home heating oil for 3 years, doubling the rural rebate, and creating a new program to deliver cleaner, more affordable heat pumps to families in the region while we save them thousands of dollars every year.
I don't think they're saving me any money.
It's been 8 long, miserable years with this
Poindexter.
Liberal government. A year ago, they voted to keep the carbon tax on home heating, and now they're in full panic mode with polling numbers in free fall. Their new re-election slogan is elect them that only quadruple the carbon tax right after the next election. No relief either for the second carbon tax the Prime Minister has piled on. My constituents know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the NDP Liberal government admit that their carbon tax is punishing Albertans and axe the entire carbon tax?
I like his suit. That's a very traditional outfit. You don't see that style very often. I also like his suit.
We were going to double the rural top-up for Canadians who benefit from the implementation of carbon pricing. We will also, through a pilot project, make it free for Atlantic Canadians who want to switch to heat pumps, which will enable them to save $2,000 per year, Mr. Speaker. What is it the Conservatives don't like about it? I'll tell you what they don't like about it. It's making Canadians less dependent from their big oil friends. That's what they don't like about it. They want Canadians to continue paying for inefficient, polluting, and pricey system. That's not what we want to do on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Calgary-Shepherd.
It's obvious that side is in panic mode because of falling polling numbers. So they're serving us election
This is
gimmicks.
true.
This week's food bank report says that 1 in 6 Canadians are working hungry. They're working and are going to the food bank. Herman in my riding tells me he's been going to the food bank for almost 2 years. So does his brother and 2 of his friends. Another constituent told me he's okay. He's only skipping 1 meal a day.
They've got the wrong title up.
For the 2 other days. Herman and my constituents know this. The Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the NDP Liberal government treat Albertans fairly and axe the entire tax so they can put food on their dinner tables?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's hard to take these champagne
Turnbull.
conservatives seriously as they continue to stand
They've got the wrong title up. I don't know what's going on.
Hardships that Canadians are feeling, while every step of the way they oppose the very measures that our government has consistently put forward to help the most vulnerable. Measures like the Canada Child Benefit offering families hundreds of dollars per month to support their children, and childcare, which is saving families hundreds of dollars per month. Instead of weaponizing Canadians' hardship for political gain, perhaps they could consider supporting real measures that help Canadians, like the Affordability Act.
He depends on the paper so much. When do you think it's an appropriate time to start wearing a poppy?
Ask all members on all sides of the
There's
House to
Greg.
please, keep your comments to the time that you're recognized and you have the floor. So
Greg's
got to
go.
Members can listen to the questions and to the answers. The honourable member from
He's changing things. There's an initiative happening, I think,
Mr. Speaker.
that
Mark is a local grocery
it's subtle,
store
it's
owner in
nuanced,
Dawson City.
but
Mark
it's
has seen
happening.
his already high shipping costs get slapped with a 94% fuel surcharge because of this Prime Minister's carbon tax. A dozen eggs is $8. A pound of butter is $9. And get this, a kilogram of cheese is $30. Yukoners know they simply can't afford this Prime Minister any longer. Will this NDP Liberal government finally stop punishing Yukoners and axe their carbon tax?
I prefer what he just did, which was pausing to look at the paper rather than holding it and reading it. That's okay.
Canada Energy Regulator estimates that
This is not.
will provide about 30% of total Canada's supply in
No good.
2050, compared to less than 6% in 2021. Now, according to a recent study by the Public Policy Forum, offshore wind could be for Atlantic Canada what, and I quote, oil was for Texas or hydropower for Quebec. This is transformational for Atlantic Canada. I think a lot of Canadians, Mr. Speaker, are wondering why is the Conservative Party opposing the development of clean, renewable energy for Atlantic Canadians and, in fact, for all Canadians, Mr. Speaker?
I don't mind Stephen Guilbeault. I don't. Look at how many empty seats there are on Friday, though. That's where your tax dollars are.
Despite this Prime Minister's fancy photo ops,
I like Bob Zimmer.
Yesterday, Yukoners are facing a cold winter where they have to decide between keeping their kids warm or keeping them fed. Carbon tax is causing transportation costs to double and food prices to skyrocket. Instead of making it better for struggling Yukoners, this NDP Liberal government is making it worse. After 8 years, this Prime Minister simply isn't worth the cost. Yukoners want to know, will they end in its entirety the carbon tax? When?
I like the way that guy delivers, Bob Zimmer. I haven't seen him asking questions before.
Mr. Speaker, I respect the honourable member across the way.
Randy's dumb.
For the people of
Hand in his
Yukon, we
pocket.
have a fantastic member of Parliament on this side that actually represents the Yukon. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the investments that we are making in that territory are transformational investments in our tourism industry, in making sure that we have climate resiliency. Mr. Speaker, what the Conservatives have against climate change is the fact that they don't believe in it. They ran on a policy to actually fight climate change.
Calm down, Randy.
Now they're under new management. They don't care. We're due. We're going to fight climate change for Yukoners and all Canadians.
I don't think Randy could find Yukon on the map.
For Terrebonne. Mr. Speaker, once again, this government is going it alone, threatening the survival of 250,000 businesses. Everyone's asking the government to defer repayment of the CEBA loans for another year. The premiers of Quebec and the provinces, the National Assembly, unanimously, the Federation of Independent Business, the Restaurant Association, everyone's on the same side, the entrepreneurs' side, except the federal government. When will they stop stubbornly standing alone against the world and offer the deferrals everyone's asking for?
Hey, angry Canadian, what do you think of the Bloc Québécois?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Share your
Speaker,
thoughts.
and I'd like to thank the member opposite for her question and her continuous advocacy for small businesses across Canada. Mr. Speaker, the CEBA program provided unprecedented support to nearly 900,000 small businesses and helped them keep their doors open and keep the lights on. Last year, our government extended the forgiveness qualification deadline by 1 year to the end of this year. We know times are still tough for small businesses, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we recently announced a full 1-year extension on the term loan repayment. We will continue to be there for small businesses throughout Canada, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Terrebonne. Mr. Speaker, repeating what the government has done in the past won't stop any of the 250,000 businesses threatened with bankruptcy in 2024. No one's attacking their record. Everyone's asking what they're going to do today. They need to open up a direct channel of communication with small businesses to offer them personalized solutions and a reasonable extension. The solution is in their hands. What are they going to do today to avoid a wave of bankruptcies? What's the government going to do today?
Greg's taking a stand.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. Look, the bottom line is that we've been listening to businesses across the country. And if you're a small business and you do not currently have the funds to repay your CEBA loan, you now have 3 years to repay it in full. The additional flexibility that we announced is significant support for small businesses who might still be struggling to make ends meet, Mr. Speaker. The CEBA program delivered more than $49 billion to nearly 900,000 small businesses. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to support small businesses as we all recover from the pandemic. Thank you.
Straight from the paper. That's lame, Brad.
Mr. Speaker, a report released this
Brian.
week by Food Banks Canada shows that more Canadians are relying on food banks than at any time since 1989. And it's no surprise. The carbon tax applies to the farmers who grow the food, the truckers who truck the food, and the grocers who refrigerate the food. Clearly, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Mr. Speaker, after 8 long years, will this Liberal NDP government finally completely cancel its inflationary carbon tax.
He didn't use the paper at all. Why would you hold it? It's just a bad look in my mind.
Our government has
Look how dumb it makes you look.
Through action that we really care about the struggles that Canadians are facing.
That helps.
But it's hard to take these Johnny-come-lately conservatives seriously. When the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food came to Canada in 2012, he documented that 55% of households on social assistance were food insecure, and said it was the inadequacy of social protections that led to the burden on the food banks. So what did the conservative Harper Conservatives do, Mr. Speaker? The Conservatives fed Canadians a nothing burger for almost a decade.
Nothing. That's a good line.
So they're reckless and irresponsible.
Oh, watch Greg.
The honourable member from Chatham-Kent, Leamington.
I'm fed up with Greg. Like, I'm waiting for him to mess up or screw things up every time.
To keep the carbon tax on home heating. Yesterday, the Prime Minister flip-flopped. Why? Polling numbers. Yesterday's announcement of the pause on the carbon tax on home heating won't help 97% of Canadians. Canadians can see this for what it is. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government is just not worth the cost. The common sense Conservative promise is simple. No gimmicks, no temporary measures. Will the panicking, plummeting Prime Minister admit he cares more about polls than Canadians, and will he now axe the entire carbon tax?
I'm just glad that I'm not going to have carbon tax on my heating bill. I am glad for that. So I'll take it.
Plan to actually fight climate change and then threw it out the window when they got a new chief executive officer for their party. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, all they want to do is take us back to a time when polluters could actually pollute for free. And Mr. Speaker, our plan is going to allow Atlantic Canadians to shift from a high GHG fuel to a solution that is actually going to lower GHGs in perpetuity. That means for the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, forever. We're going to keep fighting climate change. They can keep complaining that we're actually doing the right thing on behalf of Canadians.
Randy's got one hand in his pocket all the time. Just pay attention. It's funny. I like Gerard Detel. He's so intense. This guy is so intense.
In Quebec.
Check him out.
The second Liberal carbon tax will cost up to 20 cents a litre more for gas, and all this with Bloc support. More money in Ottawa and less money in Quebecers' pockets. After 8 years of Liberal government, 1 Quebecer in 10 is resorting to food banks. The Liberals with the Bloc want to create a new tax when people in Quebec are suffering.
1 in 10 people in Quebec are using a food bank, he just said?
My honourable colleague for his
That's
question.
crazy.
And I'd also like to remind him that what he's talking about is a clean fuel standard, which was in the Conservative Party platform in the 2021 election. However, despite having campaigned on such a measure because it would help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the oil patch, and there have already been $2 billion worth of investments all across the country in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and even in Quebec, but the Conservatives would scrap all those investments and all that program creation. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, where was the minister last year? Because on October 24th, 2022, we voted on a motion here which the Conservatives proposed to scrap the carbon tax on home heating. And just yesterday, the Liberals flip-flopped and suddenly said they supported that idea. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, if people in the Atlantic region are going to get a break, what about Quebecers? What about Montrealers? Are they going to give them a tax too, a break too, and scrap the carbon tax?
Just get rid of the tax.
It's true, Mr. Speaker. It's hard to follow all the information about climate change, and I can understand why my friend opposite is a bit confused. So the clean fuel standard applies all across Canada. It applied yesterday, it applies today, it applies in Atlantic Canada, in Quebec, Alberta, or even BC. It's completely different from the carbon tax. And the investments are creating hundreds of jobs, including among farmers who are going to produce canola and so on. But if the Conservatives took office, all of that would disappear.
And I have Deputy to North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday in my riding, a 13-year-old overdosed at a local business.
What?
Luckily, a nurse and local firefighters saved her life, and I am so grateful.
13?
In BC alone, more than 1,800 have died this year due to the toxic drug supply. The Liberals have delayed mental health funding while people die. And the Conservatives, they want to punish people who are struggling. When will the Liberals deliver a national health-based plan to address the toxic drug crisis?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank the member
13
for the
years
very,
old.
very
What a
serious
terrible,
question. Since
terrible
2016,
thing.
our government has had a view that we need a comprehensive, collaborative, and evidence-based substance use policy with harm reduction and treatment as the key part. This is a public health issue, not a criminal one, and must be addressed the way alongside well-trained, monitored, and resourced public safety components. People who are struggling, Mr. Speaker, need everyone at the table, everyone in this room. Federal government working with provinces and territories on a system that includes health and mental health term services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Look at how many empty seats, though, guys. That's our tax money.
Leaked emails from Global Affairs Canada revealed that the government has no plan for over 400 Canadians desperately trying to flee Gaza and hundreds more in the West Bank. In Gaza, they have no food, they have no water, and the hospitals are crumbling.
Get
the
out of
Minister
there.
and the Prime Minister have no answers for Canadians, and they refuse to call for an end to Israel's siege and a full ceasefire. What's the plan to evacuate Canadians out of Gaza and the West Bank? How many Canadians and Palestinians will die before the Liberals call for a ceasefire?
Do you guys know much about Hamas? Hamas?
Minister for International Development.
Top priority has always been.
He's a member of the WEC.
Security of Canadians. We continue
Just
to
so you
call
know,
for the immediate release
I've made a
of
video
all
about the
hostages and
WEC.
demand
It's worth
that they be
checking.
treated in accordance with international law. We've also sent a team of experts to the region to support the work of securing their release. With respect to the larger number of Canadians who are trying to evacuate from Gaza, myself, the Foreign Affairs Minister, and our Prime Minister have been doing everything that we can to work with our partners in the region and beyond to enable them to evacuate safely and securely from Gaza.
L'honorable député de St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker, when Canadians needed support during the pandemic, community organizations and charities stepped up to provide crucial assistance. Now, many of them are having difficulty generating revenue, managing increased costs and demand for services, and attracting and retaining paid staff and volunteers. Can the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development update Canadians on the progress that has been made to support these organizations?
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker, through the Community Services Recovery
Genocides.
Fund, nearly 5,500
Really
organizations nationwide have been funded. In the members' riding of St. John East, that means groups like the Association of New Canadians is now better able to support newcomers. The Food Producers Forum, Bell Island Community Food Bank, and the Newfoundland and Labrador Food Umbrella can continue feeding their community. These are local groups, Mr. Speaker, that are making a real difference in St. John's East.
L'honorable député de Parry-Sound-Muskoka.
This NDP Liberal government's inflationary spending is making everything more expensive, proving once again that the Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. Food Banks Canada has reported that in March of this year, almost 2 million Canadians visited food banks. That's a 78.5% increase since March of 2019. Rent has doubled, mortgages have doubled, and the number of Canadians needing food banks is skyrocketing. So when will this coalition government end their wasteful inflationary spending so Canadians can afford to eat?
I think it's up to Jagmeet to end this coalition.
Mr. Speaker, every day in this House, Conservatives stand up and talk about the lineups at our food banks as if food security in this country or food insecurity just became a thing. While our government created the first ever national food policy for Canada, invested in the local food infrastructure fund, invested over $100 million on food security organizations during COVID-19, and advanced social protections that lifted 2.7 million Canadians out of poverty, what did the Stephen Harper Conservatives do, Mr. Speaker? Nada. Nothing. Zilch. So if the Conservatives have finally woken up to the fact that food security is a need in this country, they can vote for the Affordability Act.
I think if they're bringing up Harper's name, any liberal that brings up Harper,
well, Mr. Speaker, we know that
they're
food
out of
insecurity
touch.
is not a new thing.
It's been a
only
long
getting
time.
worse under this Liberal NDP coalition. In fact, 67% of those using food banks this year were living in market rental housing and paying so much they couldn't afford groceries. What's worse is children now make up 33% of food bank clients. So the NDP Liberal talking points and photo ops are clearly not working. So when would they end their inflationary spending so we can keep roofs over our heads and kids out of food banks?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food reported as many as 4.3 million Canadians were food insecure in 2011 and said, and I quote,
what is the point of these statistics?
Canada are unable to meet their basic food needs. That was in the dark era of the Conservatives for almost a decade, where food insecurity continued to get worse and worse and worse. So I don't know when the Conservatives finally woke up and realized that this was a major issue in this country, but they did nothing for over a decade. So here we are addressing the issue, lifting 2.7 million Canadians out of poverty. I wish they would get on board and do something for once to actually support Canadians.
Started getting angry there.
L'honorable député d'Edmonton-Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, the disastrous Trudeau economic legacy, 14 deficits in 15 years in the 70s and 80s, led to untold devastation for Canadian families and massive cuts to Canadian healthcare spending and critical federal programs for seniors and families. After 8 more long years, that family legacy has now resulted in 20 consecutive deficit budgets under Prime Minister Trudeau and his son. That family legacy is definitely not worth the cost. Some are now saying that we will spend more on interest payments this year than we do on the Canada Health transfer. Is that true?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer. It must be more.
Speaker, maybe the honourable member from the south of Edmonton forgot or had amnesia over the 10 dark years under the Harper government, and quite frankly, he is one of the silent
ancient
conservative
history
voices. 30 silent conservative voices, MPs all from Alberta, Mr. Speaker, saying nothing about Danielle Smith's reckless and irresponsible attempt to take Albertans out of the CPP. Is he happy to scare seniors in his riding? Is he happy to destabilize CPP for the country, Mr. Speaker? Shame on him and his whole party for being silent and scaring Alberta and Canadian seniors.
L'honorable député d'Edmonton-Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, when each faced a global crisis, our governments definitely took distinctly different routes. Our Conservative government ran targeted, time-limited deficits and laid out a timeline to get back to balance by 2015, which we did. This Liberal Prime Minister, on the other hand, announced that the crisis was an opportunity to reimagine our economy and embarked on a wild-eyed experiment that has our country teetering on the edge of financial devastation. My question again, will this government spend more this year on interest than we do on the Canada Health transfer? Yes or no?
The answer must be yes.
L'honorable ministre.
Think we're going to get an answer? I doubt it.
The honourable member across is really good at cherry-picking facts. I can tell you conversations that I had with Conservative members of Parliament during the middle of the pandemic. You know what they said, Mr. Speaker?
What?
They said, forget the loan programs, forget the ability to help people to actually pay their rent. You know what they said, Mr. Speaker?
What?
They said, let the market decide. What did they want to have? Breadlines and poverty and decimation in our streets. Shame on them for scaring people about CPP, and shame on them for revisionist history. This is a government that supports Canadians and has lifted over 1 million people out of poverty. Shame on them.
That's as angry as you can get with your hand in your pocket.
L'honorable député de Abitibi-Bay-James, Nunavik, EU.
Monsieur le Président, 872.
Mr. Speaker,
The block.
872,000 Quebecers had to turn to food banks this year. A shocking number. This government absolutely must help these people who can no longer feed their families. During the election, the Liberals promised $1 billion over 5 years to fund school lunches. I wrote to the Minister of Finance to remind her of this promise, which has yet to be fulfilled. To date, there's been no response, with 1 in 10 Quebecers relying on food banks. Will the minister keep her promise and spend that money on feeding children?
It's a sad thing
Mr. Speaker,
to think about
we
a
know
child
that
that's hungry.
Right now, many Canadians are having a hard time putting food on the table. We are working with provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous partners, and others to develop a national school food policy and support the creation of a national school food program. We're planning this policy to reflect the regional and local needs because we know that existing meal programs do not serve the majority of Canadians. I'm happy to share with this House that the
Doesn't seem very happy.
will be coming out next week, and I look forward to working together on it.
Jenna seems exhausted.
Mr. Speaker, there's no miracle solution to the rising cost of living. We're not asking the government for a miracle today. We're asking it to keep its promise. It promised $1 billion to feed children in schools. That's not miraculous, but it could make all the difference for 872,000 Quebecers with families who use food banks. When will the government keep its promise and unconditionally transfer the money to Quebec?
She applauded herself.
Minister for Families.
Speaker, we know that kids learn better on a full stomach, and this remains our goal. The work underway on a national school food policy is critical to achieving that. We continue to work with our partners,
her voice,
the province,
her
the
delivery of her
Indigenous
voice.
partners,
Funny.
stakeholders, and children to inform the path forward on this. As mentioned, I look forward to the release of the As We Heard It report, the results of our consultation, and I look forward to working with all members in this House to move it forward.
She's a emo clown. She's so emotional.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, Canadians are increasingly convinced that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. This government's insatiable appetite for spending has triggered an inflation crisis and interest rate hikes. Millions of Canadians with mortgages are left wondering what they're going to do when their payments go up by over $1,000 a month on their next renewal. When will this NDP Liberal government get their inflationary deficits under control so people can afford to stay in their homes?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
I sat with that member on the Federal Finance Committee for 2 years, Mr. Speaker. At no point did he ever stand up and go against the austerity agenda of that party's leader. It's an unacceptable approach, but we on this side do have an approach that matters. In that community where he's from, in Calgary, we are working with that city council on a number of things, including the Housing Accelerator Fund, that will see more homes built. That brings down the cost of rent, that brings down the cost of purchasing a home. We will continue to work together, Mr. Speaker.
Peter's very calm, very subdued.
$54 million in waste, extortion, corruption, and an RCMP investigation. That's ArriveCan. And we heard shocking testimony about a group of government insiders who are running a real racket in the tech sector procurement. After 8 years of this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government, that's how they run things. And now there's an RCMP investigation. This Prime Minister clearly isn't worth the cost. So will he fully cooperate with the RCMP in this investigation?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, Jen O'Connell's fun. She gets going.
All contracts to be issued following the law and regulations set out in this place. Mr. Speaker, CBSA has launched an internal audit. They've increased oversight over contract granting, mandating new procurement certification courses. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the any investigation into these allegations, and again, any misconduct will come with consequences.
All the Liberals seem exhausted. Or just woke up, or they're baked or something.
This Prime Minister has blocked so many RCMP investigations that he's lost track of them this week. These insiders involved in this are the same ones behind the $54 million Arrive scam. And the whistleblowers that brought this waste and corruption to Canadians' attention were threatened and had their contracts cancelled by the NDP Liberal government. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, he's not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister stop lining the pockets of well-connected insiders and fully cooperate with the RCMP?
Did you see the other day when Stephanie Cousy flipped out? I think Wednesday, she flipped out. It was awesome.
Once again, we see the Conservatives taking cheap political shots at the Prime Minister instead of sticking to the facts, which is allowing any allegations of misconduct to be properly investigated. There is nothing being blocked by the Prime Minister or the government. We welcome investigation to look into these allegations of misconduct. And Mr. Speaker, we expect contracts to be issued following the law.
It's so quiet. All those empty seats.
Many Canadians across the country are worried about their future. Groceries are more expensive. Housing and basic amenities cost more too. Among them are many students and recent graduates who are just starting out in life. They face uncertain times and inflation with few savings to fall back on. Can the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development tell us what the government is doing on a practical level to help students and recent graduates put money aside to get a good start in life? The Honourable Minister. I want to thank my colleague
Watch him put his hand in his pocket.
For
There
her
he goes.
hard work. Our government understands full well that students and recent graduates need support, and that's exactly what we're doing. We recently announced that interest on Canada student loans would be forgiven. This would save young people nearly $410 a year. Our government has always been there for Canadians. I'd like to remind you that the Conservatives voted against this measure. What a shame.
Then I have Deputy de Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, new information was just revealed that the Prime Minister's office refused to release documents to the RCMP during their SNC-Lavalin investigation. Wow. At the Ethics Committee, MPs were in the room, the RCMP Commissioner was in the room, ready to testify on the RCMP's obstruction of justice investigation into the Prime Minister's SNC-Lavalin scandal. Then the NDP Liberal government abruptly shut down the Ethics Committee before the RCMP Commissioner could testify. After 8 years, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost. What is the cover-up coalition hiding?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I have to admit,
Okay.
after
Oh, she's
yesterday's
coming now. You
performance,
can hear
I'm
it.
surprised the Conservatives would dare go down this road in dealing with the fact
she's got
that
paper.
they had 26 opportunities to move a motion to bring
flipping.
forward the RCMP to committee, but instead they choose to use that as a political ploy to block the study of looking into a lobbyist-paid trip by 5 Conservatives, including
Her voice is cracking.
$100 worth of champagne, a bill, $1,200 oyster bar bill. Mr. Speaker, talk about cover-up.
It's pretty funny. The house is just empty. There's no sounds in Greg. The speaker just won't shut up.
I want to give our attention to the Member of Parliament who has the floor next to ask a question. The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr.
Control
Speaker,
freak.
the only person in this place that has broken ethics laws twice is the Prime Minister.
That's right. Yeah.
And the Prime Minister said when he took office that the government and its information must be open by default. But after 8 years, the Prime Minister only wants to cover up the truth. The RCMP Commissioner made himself available to answer questions, but the NDP Liberal government doesn't want him to speak. We've learnt it was the Prime Minister's office who blocked the RCMP from getting key documents during the SNC-Lavalin investigation. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. What is the cover-up coalition hiding?
Good question.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Mr. Speaker, it's
she's ready to go. She's going to make another joke.
Conservatives would once again talk about cover-up when it's they who are using political tactics to block the study of looking into a lobbyist paid trip for 5 Conservative members. They yelled out, Mr. Speaker, to correct me. It was 2 lobbyist paid trips. They think that makes it better. Mr. Speaker, I'm curious, was the Chateaubriand that they consumed, was that a steak or a 600-euro bottle of wine? Perhaps they could come to committee and answer those questions.
How did she become a politician, do you think?
Colleagues.
I don't think she's very clever. She comes off kind of dumb. It's funny, though. It's entertaining. She's heated.
The Bloc Liberal Alliance continues. Last Monday at the Ethics Committee, the RCMP Commissioner was in attendance and ready to testify about the Prime Minister's interference in the SNC-Lavalin affair. The Liberals wanted to adjourn the meeting, and who supported them? The Bloc Québécois. The MP for Trois-Rivières voted with the Liberals to protect the Prime Minister. It costs a lot to vote for the Bloc. After 8 years of this government, it's doing everything it can to hold on. What did the Prime Minister promise the Bloc Québécois to get their support?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaking of cost, I'm just curious, what does a $1,000 meal at the Savoy restaurant for 3 courses of a lunch, what does that look like? Maybe the Conservatives who went on a lobbyist paid trip could come to committee and explain that. Instead, Mr. Speaker, they are bringing up a case that the RCMP has considered closed for years as a way to block
She's doing well.
from the committee studying the
Good for her.
exorbitant champagne taste that Conservatives seem to have.
That's pretty entertaining. She did well that time. I think she has trouble concentrating.
Colleagues.
Greg, sit down.
Colleagues.
Jeez. Louise, man, sit down.
L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Louis.
Canada is and always has been a trading nation. Our government's Trade Commissioner Service is an unmatched network of over 1,000 business-savvy experts in 160 cities, which help businesses in my riding and across the country reach new markets. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Export Promotion, International Trade and Economic Development update Canadians on how we're helping businesses get started, scale up, and go global?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member from Lac-Saint-Louis for his strong advocacy on behalf of businesses. I visited 2 innovative companies in Montreal and heard about how they're growing thanks to our government supports. Opal RT Technologies is unlocking their global potential and now has a presence in over 50 countries. And the EDC has helped Equisoft expand to new markets like the US, Australia, UK, Chile, and South Africa. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there for business to help unlock new markets as they create good-paying jobs right here in Canada.
L'honorable député de Churchill-Kiwatinuk, excuse-moi, Churchill-Kiwatinuk-Aski.
Come on.
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians struggle, a tax evasion report confirms what the NDP has long called for, a global wealth tax to ensure the rich pay their fair share. Still, thanks to Liberal and Conservative governments, billionaires now pay next to nothing in taxes. But rampant tax evasion didn't just happen. It is a political choice. So when will this government stand up for working people and those on fixed incomes who are hurting right now, listen to experts, and implement a wealth tax so that billionaires finally pay their fair share?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has been and will continue to be committed to ensuring everyone in Canada is paying their fair share. That's why we've permanently raised the corporate income tax by 1.5% on the largest banks and insurance companies in Canada, implemented a recovery dividend of 15% on the financial sector to pay for the costs of COVID-19, and implemented a luxury tax on private jets, luxury cars, and yachts. And will implement a 2% tax on share buybacks. We're committed to ending the corporate tax race to the bottom and ensuring that multinational corporations pay their fair share of tax wherever they do business.
It seems like everybody's tired. Doesn't it seem that way to you? does to me.
Thank you, Mr.
Like,
Speaker.
no
With
energy.
The liberal climate policy
Elizabeth May is good, though.
Looking like Swiss cheese. The Greens have practical solutions, and one of them is Motion 92 from the member for Kitchener Centre to have an excess profit tax on big oil.
This is a great idea.
Costed out by the Parliamentary Budget Office, confirming there would be $4.2 billion available if the Liberals move to tax the big polluters. When will this government move to create an excess profit tax, as they have done for banking and insurance, on the fossil fuel sector that raked in, the 5 biggest companies, raked in $38 billion last year? When will we tax it?
That's pretty funny, Mubu, but she does speak well, and that tax would be a smart one. That would be a good way to earn the government some money.
Our government has done more than anyone else to ensure that large oil companies do their fair share when it comes to paying taxes
Bring up
and fighting
Suncor.
climate change. We already have regulations in place to ensure that they reduce methane emission, very powerful greenhouse gas, by at least 40% by 2025 and at least 75% by 2030. We're imposing a cap on the emission of the oil and gas sector, and as my honourable colleague just reminded this House, we've also imposed a surtax on share buybacks. We're doing more than any government has done to ensure that they do their fair share. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that brings us to an end to our Friday question period.
Guys,
as we move on to daily routine
Friday.
business, I'll ask members if.
Oh, what is going on here? I'm sorry. Greg's talking. He's going on. Anyways, thank you everybody for watching. It's Friday. I hope you guys have some plans for the weekend to do something fun. We've been doing pretty good here. We're getting more people watching. It's great. So like and subscribe. If you know anybody that might be interested in this, share it with them. That'd be cool. I'm going to have some more videos that'll be out this weekend. So yeah, stay tuned. Anyhow, thank you very much for watching. It's always fun to hang out with you guys. We'll catch you next time. See you later. Have a great weekend.